How is everybody doing? My hope is that the answer to that question is amazing, because you all look amazing. I can't see you unless you turn on your video, but my assumption is in this world that you look amazing. You at least look better than me. I guarantee you that. I can guarantee that. I want to guarantee that. Okay, if you're with us, we're talking sales, okay? One of the biggest things that I look at when I look at the real estate profession is we are all sales professions, and yet there is the biggest challenge for us to get outside of our own heads and into the space of what real estate sales and a sales profession actually means. And so I'm going to say this like a broken record, like I always do. We are advocates. A real estate professional, any kind of sales professional, you are an advocate. And one of the ways that you're an advocate is that you help people continually move forward towards the decisions that they want. And the way that we know that they want those decisions is because we have been painstakingly interested in what their needs are. And so if we have this in place, then we most certainly have the ability to help people get what they need, get their needs met, while being a top of the line advocate for everything they need. Now, the reason why I do sales training though for real estate professionals is that we get into this real, I guess we have this tenacity to do the right thing. A lot of us have this desire to grow. Not all of us are driven by money. And so there is a little bit more of this, like, I got to align with the conversations that help me move somebody forward. And yet we know that in the world of sales, everybody tends to give you the 10-foot, like, I'm only going to keep you at a distance. I don't actually want you bothering me, bugging me. I use the pants analogy all the time. We walk into a department store. We know that we need pants. We're not even wearing pants. We walk into the department store and they're like, can I help you? And we go, no, just looking. And the reality is that, no, I want to be pointed in the direction of the pants because I need pants. And the way that we change our conversations to help people understand our advocacy is how we really capitalize on a win in the sales profession, especially in real estate. And so today we're going to be talking about some of the keys from Pitch Anything. But if you've been with me in any of the sales courses that I've taught for real estate professionals, we go through a lot more than just how do we have the right conversations. It's how do we have the right mindset? How do we organize the sentence structure? How do we handle objections? How do we structure calls? How do we structure conversations? All of it really is it's about making sure that we remove every obstacle to have the real conversation that's hidden underneath everything. And I look at this, I want to actually talk about if you've ever been to a job interview, this is a great picture of why we need sales training. If you've ever been to a job interview, you've been this person that walks in and sits down and the interviewer goes, tell me about your life. And you start creating this like beautiful orchestra of like, oh, I was this and I was that, and it's a glorified this, and we give beautiful names and adjectives to everything we're doing. And we have completely brought in this version of us that doesn't exist on a daily basis. We sent our best representative to the interview. Well, if we are real estate professionals, almost every single time you sit in front of a client or consumer, you are going to get their best version of the objection wall. They're going to sit in front of you and they may be even nice and say 0 things, but the whole time they are judging you against this used car salesman personality, which is why we have to do everything we can to change our minds about that. Okay. Spend a long time in that introduction to make sure we're on the same page, that we have to reframe our brain, have the right conversations, and be advocates in a space that helps us get the consumer to what they need faster, better, more in tune. That's advocacy. And so you see these little letters, PTFAR. This is not mine. This is borrowed. It's borrowed from a program in Keller Williams has a coaching mindset training process, and it's called BOLD. And I borrowed this from BOLD, or at least that's where I learned it. And it's our programming leads to our thinking, which leads to our, wow. We're drawing a blank right now because I've got kids in the background going nuts. We all have it. It's going wonderful. Our programming thinks to our thinking, goes to our feeling, moves to our actions. We get results, and then it cycles back over into our programming. Okay, let me run through that again. our programming, right? Everything that we've already put together as filters in our body tends to lead into our thinking. Our thinking then leads into our filters. Our filters will then lead into our actions. Sorry, filters, our feelings will then lead into our actions, and our actions lead into the results. And so if in my brain, I've always gone into the process of saying, you know what? I look at sales as that dirty used car salesman. I'll never be that guy because like that's the man, you know, blah, 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 blah. But all the time, while our brain, when we associate with sales, tends to be into that negative frame. Well, unfortunately, you've already got that as your programming, which obviously, even though you say in my thinking, I want to think beyond that, the reality is that that's being programmed into you. And so we've got to change the way our programming happens so that then we can think better, so that then we can feel differently, so that we can act differently, and then obviously get the results that we desire. And when we get those results we desire, we've created a new space for programming. And so what I challenge you, the way change happens is in this box right here, the thinking box. And so I'm going to ask every one of us to make sure that we reframe the way we think about real estate, being an advocate, being a sales professional. Because when you think about yourself as an advocate, you will start feeling as though advocacy is your number one goal. And if you're feeling as you're an advocate, you will start actually acting like an advocate. And then you'll get advocate results, which then brings you back to the programming. And now the used car salesman, the dirty mustache dude that's going to be able to fast talk you into buying something, it's gone. And now we only look at things through the lens of being the advocate. Okay. Today we're going to be talking about keys from a book called Pitch Anything. And I love this book. This is a great book because it really, for two reasons. One, it's a great book because it's available to everyone. This is not a book that's like some like secret little stash from any kind of brokerage or sales guy. No dude sitting there like pimping out Pitch Anything books. You could go order it, listen to it, watch it. I don't know if you can watch it. I guess that's silly. I guess it could scroll down to the screen. Read it was the better version of that. So we can read it, we can listen to it, we can absorb the ideas and the information of Pitch Anything because it's not secretive. That's what I want to do. I want to make sure we get great content that we don't have to pay $1 billion for, that we can learn from these things and grow our own version of the story to help us grow. Okay. So Pitch Anything. The other thing about Pitch Anything is it really just helps me. It was the first place where I heard about the idea of the ancient brain, which is our first little thing we're going to talk about today. It's going to be the idea of that ancient brain. Okay. So ancient brain. Okay. The idea of the ancient brain, which is our survival instinct from the very get-go, who we are as people, right? I'm a person, you're a person, who we are as people, the ancient version of our brain, if we look through our hierarchy of needs, our very first thing is like, I need to eat, I need to not get eaten, and I need to reproduce. Those are kind of the big things for me. And so if I want to be able to eat, I'm going to make decisions on fast, quick judgment about where I can get food. Well, that ancient brain dial that helps us to not get eaten as well. So I went to this watering hole. Homeboy just got eaten by a tiger. I ain't going to that watering hole. I'm going to go to this watering hole where nobody gets eaten by tigers. That same ancient brain, that's the same trigger that happens when we sit across from somebody who's listening to our pitch, who's listening to us have a conversation about what we do, how we can be an advocate for them. It's the same brain that filters the deciding factor, right? And so it was the first place I really heard that. And we're going to talk about that a little bit because if you think about the ancient brain, the best way to fight the ancient brain is to reduce confusion, okay? And we're going to talk about that. You've got to reduce the confusion. So many of us, me included, by the way, I am the worst case scenario of using too many words to explain something that we should simplify, okay? The next thing that we have a conversation about in this book that I really took away from was having the conversation about being the prize. When we think about this mentality, right? Be the prize. I thought when I got into the actual business of sales that I was always going to be this dude that had to roll over and do this, the customer's always right mentality, and I got to just listen to everything you say and be a yes man to get the deal. He changed my mindset early on when I read this book, because it was one of the very first books that I read in the mentality of sales, even before I got into real estate. And the mentality about being the prize is that, like, if I am an advocate, then I don't have to play games. And when somebody wants to play a game with me, they don't get me. And I can walk away from anything without fear. And when I have that, I don't have anything to lose. And I think that's what it gained for me, was the mindset that I don't have anything to lose if I'm creating myself as the prize to be had. Now, that doesn't mean we're arrogant. That doesn't mean that we're rude or brash. It does mean, though, that we are significant and that we have meaning. We have a reason to be part of everything that's happening, okay? All right, so we've got the ancient brain. We've got the be the prize. The third thing that really helped me to understand was that I need to be able to start looking through their lens, right? So I need to see through their lens. So I'm gonna put through, I should have written in yellow, through their lens. If you can't read that, that's what that says. I'll trace over with brown. I hear you. Somebody's out there going, well, I can't read that. I'll trace over it with brown. Through their lens. So essentially, I've got to be able to understand and look at the deal from the other side of the table to really be able to be that advocate, right? To understand everything that needs to happen. I need to really see and understand where they're coming from. And there's a big piece of that is understanding true objections versus just conditions. A lot of times we end up fighting conditions, and conditions can't really change too quickly. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well today. The last thing, which was just kind of a really cool aha in all of this, and this is something that I had recently, is the idea of this story. He talks about being prepared and ready to use story to derail people who are trying to take over the conversation, or trying to object, or trying to confuse or throw you for a loop, or that are just, just rude or angry or awkward. Like any kind of little hiccups you hit, he says, like, you should always have a story prepared to be able to combat that. And so those are the things that we're going to cover real fast right now. And then what I want to do is share with you a couple of the structures that he has. So we're going to bounce into the presentation that I teach live in the class. But the first thing is that we talk about the ancient brain, guys. And so this is all about survival, and it really regulates our world still. The ancient brain is still very much alive in everything that we do. It's that snap judgment of, can I trust this person or can't trust this person? And the way that we combat the ancient brain is we've got to be able to keep it simple, and then keep it simpler, and then even yet more simple. There's a story in a book, and I am drawing a blank. This is terrible. I'll look it up. I'll make sure it's in an email. But in the book, it's talking about how to communicate great conversations and great stories. And he talks about the way JFK would write and when he would deliver his speeches. I don't know if you know this, but his State of the Union address is one of the shortest of all time. And yet it's one of the ones we remember with just straight certainty. That has stuck in our brains. Many of you right now are thinking it's not what you can do for it's not what your country can do for you. It's what you can do for your country. It's not what your country can do. I'm messing that up because I didn't research it before I started talking, but it just popped into my brain. You know what I'm saying? And yet JFK's story wasn't 20 pages long, and everybody stood up and clapped every 2 seconds during his State of the Union address when he delivered that speech. And what's really neat is they talk about that speech, and it was a really long speech, and he condensed it, and then he condensed it, and he condensed it, and then he condensed it more until he got to that one phrase that has stuck into our brains. And what's really cool about that is that's the same kind of conversation that we need to be having with ourselves when we move into any moment that we really want to have a conversation, an advocacy conversation with anybody through sales. We really got to understand what that ancient brain is doing on the other side of the table. It is evaluating fast split judgments to know whether or not I can trust you, okay? This is where we're going to lace in story first, right? We're going to put story up here first. If I'm in the mode of helping you disseminate the information that I'm delivering, the easiest way for you to get it is through story. And so one of the biggest things you could ever do to be able to combat the ancient brain, keep it simple, find story. Keep it simple, find story. How can you tell a story so that everything that's coming across is able for them to like just link up like the way a zipper does. And they get it. They understand everything that's happening. And they don't have that croc brain go, we got to get out of here. This dude's trying to eat us. Okay? Keep it simple. Find ways to tell a story. And the way you keep it simple, if you're a listing or buying presentation, you're doing most of the talking and it's over an hour long, it ain't simple, by the way. Okay? Keep it simple, guys. Be the prize. Okay, so if you're going to have a conversation about being the prize, your audience, you need to work with them, but you are not desperate. Okay? You need to work with them, like, because that's your profession, but you are not desperate. And your everything does not depend. Your livelihood does not depend on them. And if you do get into the space to where you are dependent on somebody, right? You're at the default of their actions or activities. You're going to have a challenge of being the prize. You're going to have a lot of that commission breath. We talk about that all the time. You're going to sound desperate. You're going to talk desperate. You're going to look at them like they are a meal. And guess what's going to happen when you look at them like the meal? Croc brain goes, this dude's trying to eat me. This dude's trying to eat me. But yeah, if I'm in the prize and I've been able to really dig into what I want in my world, how I want what I want in my world, and to be able to get that out of my business, well, then we don't find ourselves in desperate mode. We find ourselves in moving forward mode, right? Two things in which you can really have the best opportunity to be in the mindset of being the prize. Actually, let's just go through things. So the first thing is, like, understand you're worth it. Okay, very first thing, understand that you are worth it. Man, you are worth it. There's nobody who could look at you or should look at you as if you're an object or a transaction. Never look at anybody else the same. Okay, you're worth it. Second thing, all right? So the second thing that we're going to go into is how are you qualifying people? A lot of times if we show up to the table and we haven't done any of the qualifications, we will feel as if we're in the back seat and they're driving the whole thing, and we don't feel like we're the prize. We feel like we are, gosh, we're almost abducted. If we're in a sales conversation, if we're in a client conversation, a consumer conversation, when we're looking at that as being a salesperson, a sales professional, and they're a consumer, and we haven't pre-qualified them properly, we will feel like we're abducted because they will take control and take charge of everything, and then we can't really get into this mentality of being the prize, okay? So one, mentality, you're worth it. Two, qualify people properly so you're not actually going in blind and that you have something of worth. And the last thing is to understand, where's your mission, vision, values lie, okay? If I go in and I have my values so succinct, there's nobody who can control me. I can walk away from anything and everything, and I will choose to walk away from anything and everything when I have super clarity around my mission, vision, and values. That's how we're able to be the prize. I hope this is making sense to you. Don't worry if you're having trouble keeping up. I do have notes that I will make sure that everybody gets. I'll send all this stuff out to you guys. You can screen capture any of this. You can record it even if you want. It'll be recorded in my page, and so you can go back to it. Three things. Mindset, get your mind in the right space, you're worth it. Understand your qualification, how are you qualifying? And the last thing is mission, vision, values, okay? Through the lens, you need to look through their lens, right? So if we're gonna be looking through the same lens, they've got to be able to see the challenge through your viewpoint, and you've got to be able to see the challenge through their viewpoint. The way that we have this happening is that we've asked enough questions to be in a needs analysis position so that we actually understand whether the needs, right? If we're advocates, we understand where their needs are in this whole process. And the way we help them to see through our lens, questions, ask a ton of questions, okay? We got to be able to ask questions, and great questions start with how and what, not with why. So don't jump into why immediately. How and what are the best questions you can ask when you're getting into the mode of having them see things through your lens. And then there's this moment to which if we ask questions in the right order, we're taking them in a journey. And so if you're asking the questions right and you're doing things the right way, you've done some research to know that at some point we're going to get into a disconnect. And if we're going to be disconnected, I'm prepared and ready to reconnect all of the tracks. I'm going to take a step back and understand when rapport is broken. I'm going to take a step back and look at how everything's aligning. And once it gets misaligned, I know how to ask a question to get us back aligned. Okay. I know how to ask a question to get back aligned. So it's about a lot of questions, about asking the right questions, but it's also about having a couple questions in your pocket that's going to help me align. And that happens when we've done their qualifications in the beginning. So a lot of this has to do with homework before we ever sit in front of somebody. And yet there's some things that we can have just preset, predetermined, regardless of who comes in to the scope, who comes into our world, whoever we're sitting across from. There's always a couple of questions that when we grab those questions, it can help us to reframe our thought processes, understand what we need to do next, and again, gets them to start looking through the lens that we want them to, which is our own. Okay. In that same vein, getting people to see through the lens, we're going to come back to this idea of story. And here's what's really neat. When you have a great story, and in all honesty, it could be a generalized great story. You should always have a story in your pocket ready to pull out to bring into a conversation, because when somebody derails a conversation, it's really interesting how quickly we can get it back into our world, especially when there's an objection or something of that sort. And let me give you an example that I'm going to shoot from the hip, and hopefully it comes out properly. If I were in this world and I was sitting across from you and we started having a conversation, and at some point you derail the whole thing with some sort of objection or some sort of like, gosh, I don't know anything, you know. So let's say it was a commission. Commission tends to derail us the most. We don't know what to do during a commission. I field a lot of conversations from our agents who are like, I just don't know what to say when they start asking me for a discount in their commission. And so I would, if you had a story though, you can get things back in order. So Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, whatever the conversation may be, we're going down the trail, and all of a sudden they're like, well, will you reduce your questions, reduce your commissions like this? Mr. and Mrs. Seller, gosh, I'm going to tell you, that's a really interesting question. I love that question. People ask it all the time. And so you're in the right mindset to be able to ask me that. You know, when I got into this business, was 5 years ago. And 5 years ago, I was having a conversation with somebody who was talking to me about value. And when they opened up the door about value, what they shared with me is that they had a car, I don't know, I'm coming up with a blank. When I got into, let me actually just do it from my own perspective, right? This is great. Raw, we're in real life, we're in real time. Some of you are laughing at me, it's okay. I'm gonna tell you, I'm just gonna give it a shot, right? So if you're sitting across from me, I didn't have a prepared story, I'm just gonna tell a story, okay? So Randy, will you reduce your commission? Yeah, you know, that's a great question. And I'd like to share a story with you, really, to answer that question. When I got into this business, I really looked at what were the reasons why I wanted to do this. And one day I was sitting there across from my wife, and we were having a conversation about our finances. And so as we were having a conversation about our finances, she was asking me like all of these different questions. And through the process of asking me these questions, I was just answering, yes, this is this. Yes, this is that. We're spending this much money here. We're spending that much money there. And as we were going through that, she looked at me and she stopped the whole conversation. And she goes, I want to be able to see this. How can I see this? And I was like, oh, well, it's, you know, if you log into our bank, you can do this. And I'll look up that, and here's some logins. And so I started telling her all the how-to, and yet she looked at me and she goes, Randy, here's the thing. When I can't see it, I don't feel safe. When I can't see it, I don't feel safe. And it's a real spot check in your world when your wife looks at you and tells you that she doesn't feel safe. And so for me, I looked at that moment as defining what value looked like in my life. Value for me was making sure my wife felt safe. And that when we had conversations about money, that it wasn't just me telling her what to do, it was me showing her where value was in our family. And so when I look at that, I can kind of draw the same comparisons. And mostly what you want out of this whole thing, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, is value, right? You want to feel safe? Yeah, I do. I really want us to feel safe. If I can provide you with the safety, and I can make sure that through this whole process, you have open eyes to everything that we're doing, would you be confident that what you're paying in commission is worth every single penny? questions. They may or may not say yes, but at that point, at least I've been able to derail it. I've got them back in my space. They've started listening to me. They're starting to feel a little bit. They've got a little bit of that tinge. I've just compared them with the safety of a wife. If a wife is in there, she's probably going to be drawn into that conversation. It changes everything when we have just a quick story to tell when things get derailed. And again, I just totally shot that from the hip. I should have probably had, if I was going to teach about that, I probably should have had a story ready to go. And yet that is a real life story. That is something that truly happened in my world. And I was just finding a way in which I could translate it in real time to what I was giving to you guys as an example. So any of your stories can work. In all honesty, it could even be humorous to be able to work. And it's got to be able to be transcendent into any space. So if anybody asks a question that was about value, I can tell that story about her feeling safe. It was about like timing, I could tell a story about her feeling safe and drawing safe. Like so regardless of what the thematics of why they're objecting or why they're derailing the conversation, my story should be able to get us back focused on me so I can keep the conversation moving in the direction of where their needs are. Okay, so that's the formula behind it. Derailed, I have my story that I can bring the attention back to me and focus the conversation back towards where their needs are, their needs analysis. And I hope that makes sense, guys. Sorry about the flub in the middle where I was trying to make up a story and I didn't have a good one. And you guys are very kind to let me walk through that. Okay. All right. The last thing I want to do, and I'm going to make sure this comes to you and it gets to you in your inbox. Okay. Is that I want to show you a couple of things in which in Pitch Anything, what he does to frame some of the mindset to be able to fight that alligator brain, some of this price stuff. How does he do this systematically? Because a lot of times that's what we need to be able to put action into our world, is to do things systematically. So let me share with you my screen and we will go straight into the Pitch Anything PowerPoint. Okay. So when I am looking at the idea of Pitch Anything, one of the first places that I would start is with this, that be aware of the croc brain. The croc brain, it is the gatekeeper, right? The croc brain is the gatekeeper. The croc brain is the gatekeeper. And so pitches are transmitted in from the modern or the smart part of the brain, the neocortex, but they're received in that old brain that really makes sure that we're getting eaten or not getting eaten. Those of you who are on my Facebook page, I'm going to share my screen as well with y'all, because I think you might be missing a little bit. So let me stop sharing and let me Facebook is not going to let me, so you guys are just going to have to trust that it's brilliant. And if you need this information later, we'll make sure that it's in the presentation that goes to YouTube, and so you can get connected to that. So let's go to this. So we're going to be having a conversation about the ideas behind Pitch Anything. So you can't see this, but I'm going to explain it to you. So this is just a little bit more of an interesting look or interesting view, if you will, of the idea behind Pitch Anything. The second thing here is going to be learning the strong method, right? So when you learn the strong method, this is our ability to pitch anything. We go in and we set the frame, right? Every meeting, every presentation is a social encounter. It's governed by frames. And so we're going to frame the whole thing to make sure that we are setting the parameters for how things are going to happen. We're going to tell story, right? We're going to involve story back into the process of what we're doing. Story is a real big piece to the puzzle when we're delivering information. And a lot of times we're only ever delivering information, okay? Reveal the intrigue. So you've got to be able to create a moment of a hook, essentially, right? There's got to be a moment of a hook. Offering the prize. And so when you get into this idea of offering the prize, you got to understand that the tables can turn in any arrangement. So instead of chasing the deal, you've got to be able to offer everything as the prize. It's got to be a moment of they can capture, they can win, they can be the hero of the story when they come alongside of you. Nail the hook point, right? So you've got to be able to have them intrigued by everything, but then you got to be able to nail the hook point. And the hook point, right? It's about getting closer and closer to the closing. So how can you get them engaged emotionally? So if we're going to talk about nailing the hook point, it's about getting engaged emotionally. And the last thing in here is to be able to get the deal. So After all is said and done, we have to be able to have a great, strong close to be able to get the deal done. So set the frame, tell the story, reveal the intrigue, offer the prize, nail the hook point, and get the deal. Those are the ideas behind Strong. So learn Strong method, STRONG. Set the frame, tell the story, reveal the intrigue, offer the prize, nail the hook point, and get the deal. Okay. There's this idea that they go through in this book, understanding the grand architecture. And so I would just encourage you to open the book and dig into it. It's going to be a lot more concise in that space. But to understand that, like, the grand architecture is essentially your ability to, like, you've done your homework, and you've gone into this space ready and available to connect emotionally, to listen to their needs, to understand what they're at, understand how you can be of service to them. Like, this is the moment to which you can have everything. You can set the stage to be connected, right? And that's one of the big pieces to it. So you got to understand the architecture, the grand architecture. And I would encourage you to get the book for this space, because we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about these last things here, which is the 6 pitching flaws, overcoming the 6 pitching flaws. And here's what the pitching flaws are. So those of you who aren't connected in the Facebook Live, I know that I've lost a few of you guys. And if you are curious, we'll make sure this is posted into the Google. It'll be recorded and go into YouTube. But the idea of the 6 pitching flaws, one is talking too much. Talking too much. You've got to be able to practice questions if you're talking too much. The way you realize whether or not you're talking too much, record yourself doing one of these, like role play it, even real play it would be better. So like actually go through a process with somebody that you would do a listing consultation, but you talk too much. You're going into the space and you're talking too much. Silence, let the silence do the heavy lifting. Ask questions, allow them space to be able to answer, and it gets you into the same page, okay? Too vague or too fuzzy. So the first one is you talk too much. The second one is it's too vague or too fuzzy. If we are too vague or too fuzzy, nobody knows how they're connected to your story, right? So it's too vague or too fuzzy. It makes sense to have details, not overly detailed, but it makes sense to have details and understand exactly what you want. What is the outcome? Today we're going to be doing this, this, and this. Our hopeful outcome is this and this, and you're going to gain this. Too vague or too fuzzy. Third thing, you seem too needy. So overcoming 6 pitching flaws. Too much talk, too vague, too fuzzy. You seem too needy, right? You've got to be able to make sure you're the prize. This is kind of going back to that idea of going for the prize. Going too slow. You're going too slow is a great idea of a great piece of this. And when he's looking at the pitching flaws, going too slow. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you got to talk faster. It just means that you're not pacing yourself according to your audience. Okay, I'm gonna say that again. You're not pacing yourself according to your audience. If I walk in and it's a room full of executives that's given me a very short amount of time, I've got to be in cadence for them to understand what's going on and what's happening. If I'm going too slow, or I'm taking too long to get to things, or there's too big wide gaps where there's no, like, if I've created too many random spaces, or I've opened it up to too much conversation, or I've given them too slow is worse than too fast. Too slow is worse than too fast because they lose their attention span, right? It's that croc brain stepping back in. It's too similar to other pitches. That's one of the big things that you need to understand, is that there should be a unique value proposition in everything that you do. That means that you should understand where your mission, vision, values are, so that then you can align with why it's important that you do business with me. And the way we really capitalize on that is to make sure that we aren't similar to everybody else. The way we know if we aren't similar to everyone else's, you got to know what everybody else's story is. Who's your competition? Do your homework, know what they're doing, know what everybody else is doing, and make sure that your value proposition is above par. And then the last thing here is no frame to provide content. You've got to be able to frame the idea behind what you're doing, where you're going with it. So you've got to create a frame so that they can to provide context, right? Sorry, I said content, context. There's no frame to provide context. You've just gone in and started talking. There's no objectives given. There was no idea of what's going to happen. There was no outcomes. There was nothing that was provided in a frame. We just showed up and we started talking. You've got to be able to frame everything so that you can provide context. And so the 6 pitching flaws: you talk too much, you're too vague or too fuzzy, you seem needy, you're going too slow, you're too similar to other pitches, and there's no frame to provide context. And so if we start to even just evaluate in which of these 6 do I tend to have the biggest challenges, if we correct one at a time, you're going to find your ability to pitch grows. And everything that we've talked about, I don't know if you've noticed, but over the 6 courses of this sales class with you guys, everything that we do, everything that we talk about, we've talked about creating systems around it, right? So this is a strong method. We've got how to handle objections with their little acronym. We've got all the little things for point FAR, right? We've got all of our little pieces that we've been able to pick up from each of these little sales classes. All of them are just to be able to help trigger our brain to know when we need to use it, right? When do we need to do these things? When do we need to make sure that we're on point? And so I'm going to encourage you right now is that if anything sticks out to you, especially in these sales classes, you got to be able to write it down and start doing one thing. My thing to you for this class, if I were going to give you one thing to do from this class, I would understand those 6 pitching flaws, and I'd find out which ones I am violating the most so that I can start correcting that one thing. Because once you correct that one thing, it'll make a big difference. And then really begin to understand practicing the idea behind storytelling. Donald Miller has a great book called Story Brand. I would encourage you reading that book as well. So this book, again, is Pitch Anything. If you want to open it up and to be able to get a little bit more of an idea on how to just combat that ancient brain and to be in position to at least have your conversation with the client heard and understood, then you're really going to have that opportunity to know whether or not you can handle their objections or whether it's a condition of their world, right? And the difference between those two, an objection is just me pumping the brakes on you because I got to figure out if I can trust you. A true condition is that I can't fix it right now. A condition is I can't fix it. So if my credit score is bad, I can't buy right now because that's a condition. I have to fix the credit score. I don't have a down payment is a condition, right? That's not an objection, that's a condition. So there are certain things that are conditions, certain things that are objections. And once we understand how we can organize our conversations with people through sales, we know when those arise and how we actually fight through each one of those. So Pitch Anything is about getting into a stance, having a structured, organized thought process that when I sit across from anybody, I am in the best position to be an advocate in this process and not just some dude trying to get a transaction finalized and complete and signed on the dotted line. Sweet. I am done. That's it. That's the 6 classes. That is all of the information. I will circle it all the way back around again and start teaching from number 1 in a couple of weeks. But that's it. This is it. This is sales. This is us as advocates for our clients. And we've learned a lot and we've grown a lot. I would hope we've grown a lot. I learn a little bit more every time I teach one of these classes because it forces me to dig back into the material that I was able to grow so much from over these years of being in production. So I appreciate it, guys. I'm going to leave that as that. If you have any questions, go ahead and pipe up. If not, we shall see you tomorrow. And tomorrow is actually, we won't see you tomorrow. I'm not teaching anything tomorrow. Sorry about you. I will be teaching 2 classes on Friday, though. So you can come back and catch us on Friday. I'm going to talk about Give a Mouse a Cookie. It's a children's book. Why we need to keep people out of our lives that tend to drain us. And then I'm going to have a conversation about coaching. So anyways, you guys are awesome. If you need anything at all, holler. If you don't, I guess don't call me if you don't need anything. I'm just kidding. You can call me anytime.